Tonight, we delve into the armaments of the lands between, those legendary weapons that have shaped the very fabric of this shattered world. Each blade, each hammer, each sacred relic carries with it a story written in blood and sacrifice, in ambition and despair. These are not mere tools of war, but testaments to the demigods, warriors, and craftsmen who poured their very souls into steel and sorcery. As you rest at this grace, let us journey together through the histories of these legendary artifacts. We will trace the origins of cursed blades and consecrated steel, explore the craftsmanship of forgotten civilizations, and uncover the secrets that lie dormant within weapons that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. From the duality of night and flame to the all-consuming hunger of blasphemy, from the gravity that commands the very stars to the moonlight that pierces the darkness, these are the weapons that defined an age. The Sword of Night and Flame. Hidden within the towering walls of Caria Manor, secreted away in a locked chamber, accessible only to those bold enough to traverse the treacherous rooftops, lies one of the most enigmatic weapons in all the lands between. The Sword of Night and Flame rests in darkness, waiting for a worthy wielder who can command both the frozen intellect of sorcery and the burning passion of incantation. The storied blade stands as a treasure of Caria Manor, counted among the 9 legendary armaments that have become the stuff of myth and legend throughout the realm. Its very existence speaks to a time before the shattering, when the great houses of the lands between held dominion over their territories with wisdom and power. The weapon's description tells us of the astrologers, those who preceded the sorcerers we know today. These ancient scholars established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky itself, building their observatories and academies in the highest peaks where the air grew thin and the stars seemed close enough to grasp. In those lofty heights, they considered the fire giants their neighbors, those massive beings who tended the flame of ruin atop the peaks of the world. This proximity was not mere geographical happenstance. The astrologers, in their pursuit of cosmic knowledge, understood that to truly comprehend the universe, one must study both the cold light of the stars and the fierce heat of the primordial flame. The Sword of Night and Flame embodies this philosophy, a physical manifestation of dualistic understanding. Its blade captures both the chill of the dark moon and the rage of the giant's flame, bound together in harmonious opposition within a single weapon. When examining the sword's construction, one cannot help but marvel at the craftsmanship involved. The blade itself seems to shift between states, neither fully solid nor entirely ethereal. Light plays across its surface in ways that defy conventional understanding, as if the weapon exists partially in the realm of glintstone sorcery and partially in the domain of sacred flame. The crossguard bears intricate designs that speak to Carian royal aesthetics, while the pommel contains crystalline structures that pulse with inner light. The weapon's unique skill, Night and Flame Stance, allows its wielder to channel two distinct forms of devastating power. By holding the sword level in a composed stance, the warrior prepares to unleash either a horizontal beam of night blue sorcery or a sweeping arc of sacred flame. The night comet that emerges from the former tears through the air with the concentrated power of Comet Azure itself, a focused lance of pure magical destruction. The flame sweep from the latter spreads before the wielder like the wings of some great phoenix, consuming everything in its path with holy fire. What makes this duality even more remarkable is how seamlessly the blade transitions between these opposing forces. There is no conflict within its core, no struggle between the cold and the hot, the dark and the bright. Instead, there exists perfect balance, a testament to the skill of its creators and the profound understanding they possessed of the fundamental forces that govern reality. An interesting piece of history emerges when we examine earlier versions of the game's text. In the Chinese and Korean releases at launch, before subsequent patches, the weapon bore a different description entirely. It was said to be a magical sword forged to celebrate Renala's wedding, with the cold crystal symbolizing the queen of Rea Lucaria on one side, and the giant's flame symbolizing her husband, Radagon, on the other. This alternate origin story adds layers of meaning to the weapon. If indeed the Sword of Night and Flame was created to commemorate the union between Renala and Radagon, then it represents more than just a marriage of opposing magical schools. It symbolizes the joining of two great houses, the Academy of Rea Lucaria and the forces of the Golden Order. The fact that this description was changed in later versions raises questions about the evolving lore, but the romantic symbolism remains compelling. Consider what it means for such a weapon to exist as a wedding gift. In the culture of the lands between, where houses rise and fall through conquest and alliance, a wedding between the Queen of the Academy and the champion of the Golden Order would have been momentous. The sword, then, becomes a declaration of unity, a promise that cold reason and burning faith could coexist, that the pursuit of knowledge and the devotion to order could strengthen one another rather than conflict. The Carian royal family has long been associated with the moon and its mysteries. Their sorceries draw upon the cold light of the dark moon, channeling its power through glintstone and spell. But fire was never their domain, not naturally. The inclusion of flame in this weapon suggests an intentional reaching beyond their traditional boundaries, an acceptance of power from a source they did not typically embrace. Those fire giants who dwelt as neighbors to the astrologers carried within them the flame of ruin, that fell fire that could burn even the Erdtree itself. That the astrologers would incorporate such destructive power into their philosophy and their armaments speaks to a pragmatic understanding of the world. They recognized that to survive in the lands between, one needed more than just the cold calculations of the stars. One needed warmth, passion, the ability to consume, as well as to illuminate. The weapon's location within Caria Manor itself tells us much. It is not displayed openly in some hall of honor, nor is it locked away in a deep vault. Instead, it rests in a chamber that can only be reached by those willing to brave the manor's outer defenses, to leap across gaps and navigate treacherous architecture. This placement suggests that while the sword was valued, it was also kept somewhat apart from the main treasures of the house. Perhaps this separation was intentional. The Sword of Night and Flame, with its dual nature, may have been seen as too powerful or too volatile to keep in close proximity to other artifacts. Or perhaps the time after Radagon left Rennala to become Elden Lord and consort to Queen Marika, the sword became a painful reminder of promises broken and unity shattered. It may have been placed in that distant chamber, not for safekeeping, but to keep it from constant view, to prevent the wound of abandonment from being perpetually reopened. The requirements to wield this blade speak of its demanding nature. A warrior must possess not only physical strength and dexterity, but also significant investment in both intelligence and faith. This dual requirement is unusual among weapons of the lands between, where most armaments favor either the physical or the magical, the learned or the faithful. The Sword of Night and Flame asks for balance, refusing to be mastered by those who have not walked both paths. When used in combat, the weapon demonstrates why such requirements exist. The night comet it fires does not simply deal magic damage, it pierces through defenses with the pure, concentrated force of stellar energy. The flame it sweeps does not merely burn, it sanctifies and consumes with holy power. To command both requires a mind that can hold contradictions without breaking, a soul that can embrace opposing philosophies without losing itself to madness. There are those who see in this weapon a template for what the lands between could have been. If the marriage between Rennala and Radagon had held, if the Academy and the Golden Order had truly unified their strengths, perhaps the shattering could have been avoided. Perhaps the realm could have found balance between reason and faith, between the cold pursuit of knowledge and the warm embrace of order. But that is speculation, the wandering of a mind at rest. What we know for certain is that the Sword of Night and Flame endures, waiting in its chamber for a tarnished who possesses the wisdom to wield both its aspects. It stands as a monument to what was, to what could have been, and to the enduring hope that opposing forces might yet find harmony. The blade reminds us that power comes in many forms, and that true strength lies not in choosing one path over another, but in walking multiple paths simultaneously. In the lands between, where dogma and tradition often lead to stagnation and conflict, the Sword of Night and Flame offers a different vision. It whispers of synthesis, of combination, of the creative potential that emerges when we refuse to be limited by false dichotomies. And so it waits in darkness and in light, in cold and in heat, patient as the stars and fierce as flame. The Blasphemous Blade. Deep within the volcanic heart of Mount Gelmir, where the earth itself bleeds magma and the air shimmers with poisonous heat, a transformation occurred that would give birth to one of the most terrifying weapons ever to exist in the lands between. The Blasphemous Blade, sacred sword of Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, is a weapon that defies every convention of what a blade should be. It is alive, it hungers, it remembers. The description of this horrific armament tells us that remains of countless heroes writhe upon the surface of the blade. These are not decorative engravings or artistic representations. They are the actual physical remnants of the men and women, warriors and champions that Rykard devoured in his pursuit of immortal strength. Their bodies, consumed by the great serpent into which Rykard merged, became part of the blade itself. Now they twist and contort upon its surface, bound together as a family of the devoured, sharing the same cursed blood that flows through the weapon. This weapon grants a macabre gift to its wielder. Upon defeating any enemy, some health is restored. But this is not the clean healing of miracles or the natural regeneration of a hardy constitution. This is the Blasphemous Blade drinking, feeding, satisfying its eternal hunger with the death of foes. Every kill becomes a communion, a joining of the victim to the great family of the consumed. To understand this weapon, we must understand Rykard himself and the terrible path he chose. He was born to the union of Radagon and Rennala, brother to Radon and Ranni, a demigod of considerable power and intellect. Where his siblings chose other paths, Radon to become the mightiest warrior, Ranni to pursue the Dark Moon and cosmic order, Rykard turned to heresy. His home became Volcano Manor, that great fortress built into the side of Mount Gelmir, where the ground constantly threatens to give way to molten fury. There, he delved into the ancient hexes of Gelmir, those dark sorceries that had been left behind by civilizations that predated even the age of the Erdtree. Rykard did not merely study these hexes as academic curiosities. He brought them back into practical use, refining them into new forms of sorcery that bordered on the blasphemous. His involvement in the Night of the Black Knives remains somewhat mysterious, but we know he played some role in that conspiracy. Ronnie rewarded him with traces of the rune of death itself, that most forbidden fragment, so that if she should fail in her own goals, Rykard could challenge Maliketh, the Black Blade who guarded death. This alone speaks to how far Rykard had fallen from the Golden Order's grace, that he would traffic in death itself. But Rykard's true fall came when he witnessed how the other Shard-bearers fought over scraps in the Shattering. He saw them battling for power before the Erdtree, vying for the right to claim lordship in a system that he had come to see as fundamentally corrupt. The Greater Will had debased them all, turned demigods into squabbling children, fighting over a broken toy. Rykard refused to participate in this degrading spectacle. His answer was not rebellion through war or subtlety. His answer was to join the Elder Serpent that dwelled within Mount Gelmir. This was no ordinary serpent, ancient, vast, and impossibly powerful. It was said to be capable of devouring the very world if left to grow unchecked. Rykard, in an act of supreme blasphemy against the natural order, allowed himself to be consumed by this serpent, great rune and all. But this was not suicide or surrender. In the moment of consumption, Rykard saw a vision of the future. He saw the great serpent growing endlessly, devouring everything that existed, growing fat on the consumption of reality itself. And in that vision, he saw immortality. He saw power that would never end, hunger that would never be satisfied, an existence that continued through endless consumption and growth. When Rykard merged with the serpent, he did not simply die and get absorbed. His consciousness persisted. His will drove the creature. He became the serpent, and the serpent became him, a fusion of demigod ambition and primordial hunger. Now, neither fully one nor the other, Rykard lived within the great serpent, growing stronger with every victim they devoured together. His consort, Lady Tanith, remained devoted to this horrific new existence. She understood what Rykard had become and accepted it, perhaps even celebrated it. She would grant audiences to heroes and warriors, inviting them to meet with her new lord. But these audiences were not diplomatic exchanges or requests for aid. They were invitations to be devoured, to join the great family of the consumed, to become one with the serpent and contribute their strength to its endless growth. The Blasphemous Blade emerged from this dark fusion as Rykard's primary weapon. When the great serpent fights, it wields this massive greatsword in its mouth hand, a grotesque appendage that emerged from the serpent's gullet to grasp and swing the blade. The weapon is enormous, befitting something wielded by a creature of such impossible size, yet it can be used by the Tarnished, who defeats Rykard and claims his remembrance. The blade's unique skill, Taker's Flames, embodies the devouring nature of its master perfectly. The wielder raises the sword aloft, and blasphemous flames, dark, red-tinged fire, seems to burn with unholy hunger, engulfs the blade. Then, with a powerful downward motion, these flames are unleashed forward in a blast that not only damages enemies, but steals their very life force, drawing health from everything the flames touch. These are not the clean, purifying flames of the Erdtree. These are flames born of blasphemy, of rejection of divine order, of hunger made manifest as fire. They do not cleanse or sanctify. They consume and corrupt, turning the vitality of victims into sustenance for the wielder. Using this skill, a warrior can sustain themselves through endless combat, each blast of flame simultaneously destroying foes and healing wounds. The weapon synergizes with other items associated with Rykard's domain. The Taker's cameo, a medallion depicting the hungry serpent, also grants health upon defeating enemies. The Serpent God's curved sword, wielded by Rykard's man-serpent warriors, shares this devouring property. Even Rykard's Great Rune, when activated, provides additional health recovery. Together, these items allow a warrior to become like Rykard himself, a devourer who grows stronger through consumption, who cannot be worn down because every kill rejuvenates. There is something deeply disturbing about this entire concept. The Blasphemous Blade asks its wielder to embrace a philosophy of consumption, to become like the great serpent in miniature, growing fat on the defeat of others. It rewards violence, not just with victory, but with vitality, creating a feedback loop where killing becomes sustaining, and sustaining enables more killing. Yet, within Volcano Manor, not all accepted Rykard's transformation as positive. His own knights and men-at-arms watched as their lord's ambitions degenerated into mere greed, into an endless hunger that served no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. Where once Rykard had fought against the corruption of the Golden Order with clear purpose and vision, now he simply consumed and consumed again. These faithful retainers began to search for a weapon that might halt their lord, something that could end his blasphemous existence. They found such a weapon, the Serpent Hunter, a great spear designed specifically to slay elder serpents. This weapon they placed in Rykard's own chamber beneath the Volcano Manor, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a champion who could wield it against their corrupted master. This act speaks to a tragic loyalty. These were Rykard's own men, warriors who had followed him into heresy, who had accepted his rebellion against the greater will. Yet even they recognized that what Rykard had become was wrong, that his hunger served no greater purpose, that the serpent had consumed not just his body, but his very reason for rebelling in the first place. When a Tarnished finally defeats Rykard and the Great Serpent, they can claim the Blasphemous Blade from his remembrance. In doing so, they inherit not just a powerful weapon, but a fragment of Rykard's vision and curse. The blade will serve them, will heal them with every kill, will grow strong in their hands. but it will also whisper to them of hunger, of consumption, of the seductive promise that if they just devour enough, they can become unstoppable. The Blasphemous Blade stands as a warning and a temptation. It shows us what happens when rebellion against unjust order goes too far, when the desire to resist corruption becomes itself corrupting. Rykard's fall was not immediate or simple. He began with legitimate grievances against the greater will, with real philosophical objections to the debased system of the Golden Order. But his solution led him to become something worse than what he fought against, a consuming force that existed only to perpetuate itself. Yet the power cannot be denied. In the hands of a tarnished, the Blasphemous Blade becomes one of the most effective weapons for surviving the harsh world of the Lands Between. Its ability to restore health makes it invaluable for extended fights, for surviving encounters that would otherwise exhaust resources. It allows a warrior to push forward when others must retreat, to persist where others fail. This is the seduction of blasphemy. It offers real power, genuine advantage, immediate results. The cost is paid, not in the present moment, but gradually, through small concessions and growing dependencies, until one day you realize you have become like Rykard, driven by hunger rather than purpose, consuming rather than achieving. The blade itself remembers all this. Those countless heroes writhing on its surface are not decorative. They are aware. They exist in some twilight state, neither truly alive nor completely dead, but bound to the weapon that devoured them. When the blade feeds, they feed. When it hungers, they hunger. They are family now, united by the blood of the devoured, forever part of the great communion of consumption. And somewhere, in the depths of whatever consciousness remains after such profound transformation, perhaps Rykard still dreams his dreams of the serpent that devours the world. Perhaps he still believes that endless growth through endless consumption will somehow lead to a better world than the one he rejected. Or perhaps he has long since lost the capacity for such thoughts, reduced to pure hunger, pure instinct, pure blasphemy, made flesh and flame. The Blasphemous Blade asks nothing of us except to kill. In return, it offers life stolen from death, vitality drawn from violence. It is honest, at least, in its darkness. It makes no pretense of nobility or higher purpose. It simply hungers endlessly and invites us to share in that hunger. The Sacred Relics of the Erdtree. When we speak of the most profound weapons in the Lands Between, we must eventually turn our attention to those sacred relics directly connected to the Elden Ring itself, to Queen Marika the Eternal, and to the forces that shape the very foundations of the Golden Order. Among all armaments, none carry more theological significance, more divine weight than Marika's hammer and the sacred relic sword. these are not merely weapons of war. They are instruments of cosmic importance, tools that have touched the very essence of godhood itself. Marika's hammer stands as perhaps the most historically significant weapon in all of existence within the lands between. This stone hammer was made in the lands of the Newman, outside the lands between, in that mysterious realm from which Marika herself originated. The Newman remain enigmatic in our understanding, a people apart, but we know they possessed craftsmanship and knowledge that allowed them to create implements of incredible power. The hammer's description tells us it was the very tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring. Let that truth settle for a moment. This unassuming stone implement was the instrument used to break reality itself, to fracture the fundamental order that governed existence. When Marika raised this hammer and brought it down upon the ring, she shattered not just a symbol, but the metaphysical structure that held the world together. What drove Marika to such an act remains one of the great mysteries of the shattering. She, who had become eternal through her union with the Elden Ring, who had established the Golden Order and ruled as God Queen for an age, chose to destroy the very source of her power. The hammer was willing in her hands, or perhaps she was simply strong enough to turn even stone to her will. But the hammer's story did not end with that shattering blow. Radagon, who was Marika's second Elden Lord, and also, in the great mystery of their existence, Marika herself, attempted to use the same hammer to repair the Elden Ring. He raised it not in destruction, but in restoration, trying desperately to mend what Marika had broken, to restore the order before chaos could fully consume the world. The ring resisted, or perhaps reality itself rejected the repair. The hammer, which had been strong enough to shatter God-forged bonds, broke under the strain of trying to remake them. Rune fragments, those pieces of the Elden Ring itself, became lodged in the hammer's stone surface. The weapon is now partially destroyed, splintered and cracked, with shards of ultimate power embedded in its structure, like divine shrapnel. This transformation makes the hammer even more powerful as a weapon. Those embedded rune fragments pulse with golden light, charging the hammer with energies that no merely mortal forged implement could contain. When wielded by a tarnished who has claimed the Elden Remembrance after defeating both Radagon and the Elden Beast, the hammer becomes a conduit for forces that once governed all of existence. The hammer's unique skill, Goldbreaker, perfectly embodies this divine power. The wielder leaps high into the air, suspending themselves for an impossible moment as they channel light into the embedded rune fragments. Then they smash down with devastating force, releasing all that stored energy in a golden shockwave that obliterates everything nearby. This is the same attack that Radagon used against the Tarnished in the final battle, the heroic strike that defined his desperate defense of the failing order. To wield Marika's hammer is to hold history itself. This stone implement witnessed the end of an age and the beginning of another. It felt Marika's determination as she brought it down upon the ring. It felt Radagon's desperation as he tried to undo her work. It cracked and broke, not from physical weakness, but from the impossibility of its task, from trying to restore what should never have been shattered in the first place. The requirements to use the hammer are peculiar. It demands strength, which is to be expected for such a heavy implement, but it also requires faith and dexterity, suggesting that wielding an implement of such theological significance requires more than just physical might. One must have faith in the Golden Order, or perhaps faith in the possibility of order itself. One must possess the dexterity to channel divine power without being consumed by it. In contrast to Marika's hammer, which represents the moment of shattering, the sacred relic sword embodies a different aspect of divine power. This weapon was wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal, forged from the very substance of the Elden Beast after its defeat. Where Marika's hammer is stone and rune fragments, earthly material touched by divinity, the sacred relic sword is divine material given physical form. The sword's description tells us that thoughts on what this weapon portends are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of a great sin, proof that the Tarnished committed deicide by slaying the Elden Beast, the living incarnation of the Greater Will's order. Others see it as a sign of great devastation, evidence that the old order has truly ended and cannot be restored. Some think of it as the end of an age, the final closing of the era of the Erdtree and the Golden Order. And others see it as a beginning, the first weapon of a new age, forged from the remains of the old. All of these interpretations carry truth. The sacred relic sword is simultaneously sacred and profane, a tool of ending and of beginning. It is made from god flesh, and the material that composed the Elden Beast's body, that radiant golden creature that served as the Greater Will's vassal and the living incarnation of order itself. To carry such a weapon is to bear the corpse of God upon your hip, to make a trophy of the divine. The sword scales with strength, dexterity, and faith, requiring balanced investments in multiple attributes to wield effectively. This makes sense for a weapon that bridges the physical and the metaphysical, that exists as both matter and meaning. Its physical blade can cut flesh, but its true power lies in its capacity to channel waves of holy energy across vast distances. The weapon's skill, Wave of Gold, allows the wielder to sweep the blade in a wide arc, unleashing a gradually expanding wave of pure, holy power that damages everything in its path. This wave does not diminish with distance, but rather grows stronger and wider as it travels, as if drawing power from the very air. It is an attack that can clear entire fields of enemies, that can strike foes the wielder cannot even see yet. This skill has made the sacred relic sword infamous among Tarnished as the most efficient weapon for clearing large groups of weaker enemies. The wave's range and width allow it to strike dozens of targets simultaneously, making it ideal for situations where swarms of foes would otherwise overwhelm. This practical utility has earned the blade a somewhat mundane reputation, reducing it from cosmic significance to mere farming tool. Yet such pragmatic use should not diminish the weapon's true nature. The fact that waves of holy energy can be used to efficiently dispatch lesser threats does not make the energy less holy or the weapon less significant. If anything, it demonstrates how divine power, when harnessed properly, can reshape the world according to the wielder's will. Both Marika's hammer and the sacred relic sword require the Elden Remembrance to obtain, that precious memory extracted from defeating the final boss of the game. This limitation means a Tarnished must choose one or the other on each playthrough, unless they use a mausoleum to duplicate the remembrance. This choice between hammer and sword, between the implement of shattering and the blade forged from divine remains, represents a choice between aspects of different power. The hammer represents change through destruction, the willingness to break what exists, to make room for what could be. It is Marika's choice, the decision to shatter reality rather than continue in a flawed eternity. The sword represents synthesis, the creation of something new from the remains of the old. It is the Tarnished's achievement, proof that they have consumed God and made something useful from the corpse. When examining these weapons together, we see the full arc of the story told through armaments. Marika's hammer shattered the Elden Ring, beginning the shattering and plunging the lands between into chaos. The sacred relic sword emerged from the defeat of the being that embodied the ring's power, marking the potential end of that chaos and the beginning of a new order, whatever form that order might take. These sacred relics speak to the nature of divinity itself in the lands between. Gods are not abstract forces or distant beings. They can be touched, fought, killed. Their power can be taken and wielded. A hammer that can break God's work, a sword that can be forged from a god's flesh. Divinity, for all its power, is ultimately material, subject to the laws of matter and force, capable of being broken down and reformed. This materiality of the divine has profound implications. It means that the Golden Order, for all its talk of eternal rule and unchanging law, was never truly eternal or unchanging. It was always vulnerable, always subject to the possibility that someone with sufficient will and power could unmake it. Marika herself proved this when she raised the hammer. The Tarnished proved it again when they struck down the Elden Beast and forged its remains into a weapon. Yet, these sacred relics also carry a burden. To wield Marika's hammer is to carry the weight of her choices, her betrayal of the greater will, her shattering of everything she had built. Every time the wielder leaps into the air and crashes down with Goldbreaker, they reenact Radagon's desperate attempt to undo her work, knowing it will fail just as his attempts failed. To wield the Sacred Relic sword is to carry evidence of deicide, proof that gods can be killed and their remains repurposed. It is a statement that nothing is truly sacred, that all things, no matter how divine, can be reduced to material and made to serve new purposes. The sword itself cares nothing for the theological implications of its existence. It simply channels holy power in waves of gold, indifferent to whether its targets are worthy or not. In the end, these sacred relics remind us that the lands between is a place where the metaphysical becomes physical, where cosmic forces can be grasped and wielded, where even gods must bow to material reality. The Elden Ring could be shattered with a hammer. The Elden Beast could be slain and forged into a sword. Nothing is beyond reach, nothing truly eternal, nothing genuinely invulnerable. This is both terrifying and liberating. It means that any order, no matter how powerful, can be challenged and broken. But it also means that chaos is never permanent, that from the remains of broken gods, new tools can be forged, new orders established. The cycle continues, endless and inevitable, shattering and reforging again and again, until perhaps one day someone finds a way to break the cycle itself. Until then, these sacred relics endure, carried by the tarnished who seek to claim lordship or reject it, who fight to restore order or to establish something entirely new. They are proof that in the lands between, nothing is sacred except what we choose to hold sacred, and even that can be shattered when the time comes. The Dark Moon Greatsword. Among all the legendary armaments scattered throughout the lands between, few carry as much weight of history as the Dark Moon Greatsword. This is not just because of its power or significance within Elden Ring, but because this weapon represents a legacy that spans across multiple worlds, multiple ages, multiple realities. From Software has included variations of the Moonlight Greatsword in nearly every game they have created, and each iteration tells us something about the world it inhabits. In the lands between, this legendary blade takes the form of the Dark Moon Greatsword, and it is inextricably tied to Ranni the Witch and her great ambitions. The weapon becomes available only after completing Ranni's extensive questline, one of the longest and most complex character arcs in the entire game. This is fitting, as the sword represents not just a powerful weapon, but the culmination of Ranni's plans to usher in the Age of Stars. This blade's description tells us it is a great sword given to Ranni by her mother, Rennala. But its history extends far beyond that simple gift. The sword was originally a treasure of Caria's royal family, passed down through generations as a symbol of their connection to the moon and to the cosmic forces that govern the night sky. It also, crucially, was the weapon of the snowy crone, Rena, who served as Ranni's mentor in the ways of cold sorcery and lunar magic. The Snow Witch Rena remains a mysterious figure, one whose full story is never explicitly told, but whose influence permeates everything about Ranni's character and goals. Rena taught Ranni the sorceries of the Dark Moon, those freezing spells that call upon lunar power to bind and destroy enemies. She shared with Ranni the secrets of the stars and the paths they trace across the heavens, and she gave Ranni her doll body, the form that the witch now inhabits after discarding her Empyrean flesh. When Ranni calls herself Rena at the beginning of her questline, she is not simply using an alias. She is invoking her mentor, acknowledging the debt she owes to the snowy crone, and perhaps suggesting that she has become the successor to Rena's legacy. The Dark Moon Greatsword, as both family heirloom and the weapon of her teacher, represents this layered inheritance perfectly. The sword itself is a marvel of Carian craftsmanship and lunar magic. Its blade appears to be made of moonlight given solid form, glowing with a pale blue-white radiance that seems to emanate from within rather than reflecting external light. The glow intensifies when the weapon is charged with power, transforming it into a beacon of cold luminescence that illuminates the darkness around it. Unlike many magical weapons that draw upon fire or lightning or conventional sorcery, the Dark Moon Greatsword channels the specific power of Ranni's Dark Moon. This is not the same as the full moon associated with Rennala and the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. The Dark Moon is colder, more distant, less concerned with terrestrial matters. Where the full moon sorceries deal with gravity and celestial mechanics, the Dark Moon sorceries focus on frost and fate, on the inexorable pull of destiny as ordained by the stars. The weapon's skill, Moonlight Greatsword, transforms the blade into an even more potent instrument of destruction. The wielder holds the sword aloft, bathing it in the cold moonlight until it glows with overwhelming radiance. Then they sweep it downward, releasing a horizontal wave of frost and sorcery that travels across the ground, freezing everything it touches. This wave of moonlight can strike enemies at range while building up frostbite status, making it effective against targets both near and far. The frostbite effect is particularly significant. When enemies are afflicted with frostbite, they suffer increased damage and reduced stamina recovery. The Dark Moon Greatsword builds this frostbite rapidly, especially when its skill is used repeatedly. This makes the weapon devastating not just through direct damage, but through the debilitating effects of supernatural cold. What makes the Dark Moon Greatsword special among intelligence-scaling weapons is its perfect balance between physical and magical damage. Many sorcery-based armaments sacrifice physical damage for magical power, making them less effective against magic-resistant foes. The Dark Moon Greatsword maintains strong physical damage, while also delivering potent magic damage with each strike. This balance makes it viable in far more situations than pure magic weapons. The requirements to wield the blade reflect its nature as a weapon for scholar warriors. It demands moderate strength and dexterity for its physical size and weight, but more importantly, it requires substantial investment and intelligence. Only someone who has deeply studied the arcane arts can properly channel the lunar energies contained within the blade. This requirement ensures that the weapon remains true to its Carian origins, usable only by those who have walked the path of magic. Obtaining the Dark Moon Greatsword requires completing nearly all of Ranni's quest, a journey that takes the Tarnished across the entire Lands Between, and even into areas most would never discover. The quest begins with a simple meeting at the Church of Ella, where Ranni appears as the mysterious Renna, offering the spirit-calling bell. It continues through Ranni's rise in Liurnia, where she reveals her true identity and goals. The Tarnished must then gather her companions, each a powerful figure in their own right. Blade, the half-wolf, her loyal shadow, bound to serve her by the two fingers. Iji, the troll, the master blacksmith who maintains her weapons and armor. Saluvis, the sorcerer, whose own dark schemes run parallel to Ranni's plans. Each of these figures has their own story, their own motivations, and their own ultimate fate. The quest takes the Tarnished into Nokron, the Eternal City, that underground metropolis where the stars once fell to Earth. There, they must defeat the Mimic Tier and claim the Fingerslayer Blade, the only weapon capable of killing the two fingers that seek to control Ranni's destiny. This blade, forged from a corpse and said to be able to harm the greater will itself, represents the physical means by which Ranni will sever her connection to the Golden Order. But even obtaining the Fingerslayer Blade is not enough. The Tarnished must then traverse the Lake of Rot, that toxic underground sea where the very air corrupts flesh. They must fight through impossible odds to reach the Dragonkin soldier and claim the key to opening Ranni's treasure. All of this is required before Ranni will entrust the Tarnished with her most precious possession. At the end of this long journey, after Ranni has used the Fingerslayer Blade to kill her own two fingers, after she has cast off every chain that bound her, she departs for the Cathedral of Manus Celis. There, deep in the underground ruins, she waits beside a coffin that will carry the Tarnished even deeper, into a realm where even gravity loses its hold. The Tarnished must defeat Astal, natural born of the void, that cosmic horror that resembles a malformed star given life. Beyond Astal lies the Lake of Rot shoreside site of grace, and beyond that, through a hidden path, lies the Grand Cloister where the Dragonkin soldier Adula waits. Only after all these trials does the Tarnished finally reach the Moonlight Altar, where Ranni's physical body once stood. There, In a chest beside the Cathedral of Manus Celis rests the Dark Moon Greatsword. The fact that Ranni leaves it here, accessible to the Tarnished who has proven their dedication to her cause, speaks volumes. This is her family's treasure, her mentor's weapon, a symbol of everything the Carian royal family represents. By offering it to the Tarnished, Ranni acknowledges them as her true consort, the one who will stand beside her as she ushers in the Age of Stars. The symbolism of the Dark Moon Greatsword within Ranni's ending cannot be overstated. When the Tarnished chooses to summon Ranni after becoming Elden Lord, she appears and speaks of her order, one of cold distance, of stars and moon far from the earth, where the question of life and death, of order and chaos, become mere distant thoughts. The Dark Moon Greatsword represents this philosophy perfectly. It is cold, not with malice, but with indifference of cosmic forces. It is luminous, not with warm golden light, but with the pale moonlight that illuminates without warming. It maintains distance, striking with waves of energy rather than requiring close combat. And it is connected to the stars, to fate, to the grand movements of celestial bodies that care nothing for the concerns of terrestrial beings. Using the Dark Moon Greatsword after completing Ranni's quest and possibly choosing her ending adds narrative weight to combat. Every swing of the blade, every wave of moonlight unleashed becomes a reminder of the choice made. This is not a weapon of the Golden Order. This is not a blade blessed by the Erdtree. This is an instrument of a different vision entirely, one where the powers that govern existence are distant and cold, rather than close and warm. The Dark Moon Greatsword also represents a break from tradition in how it contrasts with other Carian weapons. Renala's full moon sorceries focus on gravity and mass, on pulling enemies closer or crushing them with celestial weight. Ranni's Dark Moon sorceries, and by extension her sword, focus on cold and distance, on keeping enemies at bay while afflicting them with supernatural frost. This difference in approach mirrors the difference between mother and daughter, between one who retreated into grief and memory after loss, and one who actively pursued a radical transformation of reality itself. The weapon has become iconic among Elden Ring players, not just for its power, but for what it represents. To wield the Dark Moon Greatsword is to declare allegiance to Ranni's vision, to embrace the cold logic of the stars over the warm certainty of the Erdtree. It is to accept that perhaps the greatest mercy the gods can offer is distance, that perhaps the best order is one that does not seek to control every aspect of existence. In combat, the sword handles beautifully. Its wide sweeping attacks can strike multiple enemies at once, making it effective against groups. Its range exceeds many other greatswords due to the waves of magic it can project. The Frostbite buildup adds a tactical dimension, rewarding players who can land multiple hits before enemies close to melee range. And the physical magic damage split means it remains effective against enemies highly resistant to one damage type. The Dark Moon Greatsword stands as one of the most complete weapons in the game, effective in nearly every situation, beautiful to behold, and deeply connected to one of the most important storylines available. It is a weapon that tells a story every time it is drawn, that carries meaning beyond mere statistics, and transforms the wielder into a participant in Ranni's cosmic rebellion, rather than just another tarnished, seeking power. And so the blade endures, passed from royal family to mentor to student, from age to age, from world to world. In the lands between, it has found a worthy bearer in Ranni, and through her, in the tarnished who chooses to walk her path. Together, they will venture into the cold night between the stars, carrying the Dark Moon Greatsword as both weapon and symbol, ready to establish an order that exists beyond the reach of the Greater Will's warm, suffocating embrace. The Godslayer's Greatsword. Hidden at the bottom of the divine tower of Caelid, guarded by a lone godskin apostle, rests one of the most historically significant weapons in all the lands between. The Godslayer's Greatsword is the sacred sword of the gloam-eyed queen who controlled the godskin apostles before her defeat at the hands of Maliketh. The black flames wielded by the apostles are channeled from this sword, making it not just a weapon, but the very source of the god-slaying power that once threatened to topple the Golden Order before it even truly began. To understand the significance of this blade, we must delve into the mysterious history of the gloam-eyed queen herself. She was an Empyrean, chosen by the Two Fingers long ago as a candidate to succeed as a vessel for the Elden Ring, to become a god in her own right. This means she stood on the same level as Queen Marika herself, as someone recognized by the Greater Will's agents as worthy of ultimate power. But the gloam-eyed queen chose a different path than Marika, where Marika would establish the Golden Order and seal away death to create an age of false immortality. The gloam-eyed queen embraced death as a fundamental force. She wielded the Rune of Death, that fragment of the Elden Ring that contained the principle of destined death, and through it she channeled the god-slaying black flame. This black flame was unlike any other fire in the lands between. The description of various godskin incantations tells us that the black flame could once slay gods, not merely harm them, not simply wound them, but truly kill them in a way that mattered, in a way that was permanent and final. This was power that struck at the very concept of divinity, that denied the supposed immortality and invulnerability of godly beings. The gloam-eyed queen raised the godskin apostles from infancy, cradling newborn apostles in a swaddling cloth sewn together from patches of supple skin. This cloth, which can still be found in the lands between, guarded by summoned spirits in the Spirit Caller's cave, represents her maternal relationship to those servants of death. She was their mother, in a sense, nurturing them not with milk and warmth, but with purpose and power. The godskin apostles developed inhuman physiology as they grew. They learned to stretch their bodies like serpents, assimilating abilities that were not unlike those granted by the Crucible, that primordial form of the Erdtree where all life was blended and chaotic. The eldest and most powerful became the Godskin nobles, claiming noble presence during their god hunts, wearing the skins of their divine victims as marks of their terrible achievements. Under the Gloam-eyed Queen's leadership, these apostles hunted gods. This was before the Golden Order as we know it, perhaps during the time of Plesudisax's reign as Elden Lord, when other gods walked the lands between more openly. The Godskin Crusade was successful, terrifyingly so. Gods fell before the Black Flame, their supposed immortality revealed as illusion, their divine flesh as vulnerable as any other when touched by destined death. This could not be allowed to continue. Queen Marika, who sought to establish her own eternal order, recognized that the Gloam-eyed Queen's power represented an existential threat to everything she planned to build. How could there be a golden order of immortality if death could kill even gods? How could Marika rule eternally if the Black Flame could reduce her to ash? So Marika sent Maliketh, her shadow-bound beast and half-brother, to end the threat. Maliketh, the Black Blade, whose very existence was tied to Marika's will, hunted down the Gloam-eyed Queen and defeated her in battle. The defeat was total and devastating. The Queen fell, her apostles scattered, and the rune of death was taken from her. Maliketh sealed the rune of death within his black blade, binding it there with such power that death itself became constrained, controllable, no longer the wild force the Gloam-eyed Queen had wielded. With this act, Marika removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring entirely, creating the Golden Order as we know it, an order where true death could no longer touch those protected by grace. The true power of the Godslayer incantations was lost in this sealing. The Black Flame still existed, could still be channeled by those who knew the techniques, but it was diminished, a shadow of what it had been when empowered directly by destined death itself. Some monks, including Amon, who had once guarded the flame of ruin, became enthralled by these black flames and abandoned their duties to pursue this forbidden power, but they could never reclaim its full God-slaying potential. The Godslayer's Greatsword itself was locked away at the bottom of the Divine Tower of Caelid. Why Caelid specifically is never explained, but perhaps it was chosen as a remote location, far from the centers of power where this dangerous relic could be hidden and forgotten. A single Godskin apostle was left to guard it, whether as punishment, honor guard, or simply the last remnant of the Queen's followers maintaining their vigil. The sword itself is a colossal weapon, massive and imposing, with a distinct helix design running up the blade. This spiral motif appears elsewhere in connection to the Gloam-eyed Queen and the forces she represented, suggesting it holds a symbolic significance related to death, transformation, or the coiling nature of serpentine power that the apostles embodied. The blade scales primarily with dexterity and faith, an unusual combination for a colossal sword. Most such massive weapons favor pure strength, but the Godslayer's Greatsword demands faith, reflecting its nature as a sacred weapon, an implement of religious significance to the Godskin faith. The dexterity requirement speaks to technique over raw power, appropriate for a weapon that channels death itself rather than simply smashing through defenses. The weapon's unique skill, the Queen's Black Flame, allows the wielder to set the blade ablaze with God-slaying black fire before delivering a sweeping slash. An additional input permits a follow-up attack, and the black flames continue to wear down health for a time after the initial strikes. This damage over time effect is the signature of Black Flame, its ability to eat away at vitality even after the initial burning has passed. When using this skill, the blade becomes wreathed in writhing black and red flames that seem to have substance and weight beyond normal fire. These are flames that carry the memory of their original purpose, even if diminished from their peak. They remember killing gods. They remember the Gloam-eyed Queen's hunts. They remember when death was something that could touch even the immortal. The weapon deals fire damage inherently, making it effective against enemies weak to such elements. But more importantly, the black flame buildup can devastate even the most resilient foes. The damage over time effect scales based on the target's maximum health, meaning it becomes more effective against bosses and powerful enemies with large health pools. This makes the Godslayer's Greatsword particularly potent against the very targets the Gloam-eyed Queen would have hunted, those divine or demigod enemies whose vast vitality makes them seem unstoppable. There is something profoundly iconic about a Tarnished wielding this weapon. The Tarnished serve grace, that golden light extended by the Erdtree and the Greater Will. They seek to become Elden Lord, to uphold or reshape the Golden Order. Yet here, they carry the weapon of the Gloam-eyed Queen, who represented everything opposed to that order, who sought to ensure death could still claim gods, that immortality was never absolute. Perhaps this irony is intentional. Perhaps the weapon serves as a reminder that any order, even one established with the best intentions, can become oppressive and must remain subject to the possibility of its own end. The Godslayer's Greatsword whispers that nothing is truly eternal, that all power must eventually yield, that death waits even for those who think themselves beyond its reach. Vargram, the Raging Wolf, one of the recusants of Volcano Manor, wielded this sword and aspired to become a shadow-bound beast himself, to serve an Empyrean as Maliketh served Marika. His choice of weapon was not coincidental. To carry the Godslayer's Greatsword was to declare allegiance to a different vision of power, one where loyalty to an Empyrean did not mean suppressing death, but perhaps embracing it as a necessary counterbalance to life. The fate of the Gloam-eyed Queen herself remains unknown. She was defeated by Maliketh, but we are never told explicitly that she died. Given that she was an Empyrean, someone chosen by the two fingers with the potential for godhood, it is possible she endured in some form. Some theories connect her to Malenia, the mysterious maiden who guides the Tarnished and possesses a sealed eye that can open to reveal a violet gloam-colored iris. The connection is speculative, based on visual similarities and thematic parallels, but it speaks to how the Queen's story continues to haunt the lands between. What we know for certain is that her weapon endures. The Godslayer's Greatsword remains, locked away but accessible, waiting for someone bold enough to challenge the Godskin Apostle that guards it and claim the blade for themselves. In doing so, they inherit not just a powerful armament, but a fragment of history, a piece of the rebellion against the natural order that Marika sought to establish. Using the Godslayer's Greatsword in battle feels different from wielding other weapons. The black flames that coat the blade carry weight beyond mere visual effect. They are a reminder of what was lost when death was sealed away, when the natural cycle was broken in favor of an artificial immortality that ultimately proved hollow. Every sweep of the burning blade is an echo of the god hunts, a memory of when divinity was not absolute, when death claimed all, regardless of title or power. The weapon has found particular favor among Tarnished who face the latter challenges of the game, especially against Malenia, Radagon, and the Elden Beast. Against these divine or demigod foes, the Black Flame proves especially potent, its health-draining effect helping to overcome their vast vitality. There is poetic justice in using the gloam-eyed Queen's weapon against the very beings who benefit from the order established after her defeat, turning her power against the inheritors of the system that crushed her. The Godslayer's Greatsword also synergizes well with the Godslayer's Seal, a sacred relic seal that boosts the power of Godskin incantations. Together, these items allow a Tarnished to fully embrace the path of the Black Flame, to become like a Godskin Apostle themselves, wielding death against gods with the same fever that the Queen's followers once did. In the end, the Godslayer's Greatsword stands as a testament to a path not taken, an order that could have been but wasn't. The gloam-eyed Queen lost her war against Marika, and the Golden Order was established in the way Marika envisioned. But the sword remains, proof that the Queen's vision was real, that her power was genuine, that for a time the gods themselves trembled before the Black Flame. And perhaps, in the hands of a Tarnished who wields it against Radagon and the Elden Beast, in the hands of someone who uses it to tear down the very order that defeated its original owner, the Godslayer's Greatsword finally achieves its purpose. Not through the gloam-eyed Queen's hand, but through another, it brings death to gods one final time, proving that no order lasts forever, that all things must eventually yield to the inevitable end. The Black Flame burns on, diminished but not extinguished, waiting to remind the world that death remains, patient and eternal, ready to claim even those who thought themselves beyond its reach. The Grafted Blade Greatsword. At the southern edge of the Weeping Peninsula, perched upon cliffs that overlook the churning seas, stands Castle Morn. This heavily fortified stronghold has witnessed centuries of conflict, and within its walls rests one of the 9 legendary armaments of the lands between. The Grafted Blade Greatsword is the storied sword of Castle Morn, a revenger's weapon burdened with oceans of anger and regret. The blade's description tells us of a lone surviving champion from a country now vanished, a warrior so determined to continue fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors and bound them together into a single massive weapon. This is not a metaphor or exaggeration. The Grafted Blade Greatsword is literally composed of dozens upon dozens of individual blades, welded and fused together into a colossal instrument of vengeance. When you examine the weapon closely, you can see the individual swords that comprise it. Some are still recognizable as complete blades, while others have been broken down into fragments, edges, and points. They jut out at angles from the central structure, creating a weapon that is as much a statement as it is a tool of war. Each blade represents a fallen warrior, a member of a clan that was destroyed, a voice crying out for revenge, even in death. The history preserved by the Sword Monument near Castle Morn tells us more of this story. In ages past, this castle was the site of a battle between Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and this lone revenger. The warrior had collected the swords of his fallen clansmen and reforged them into the Grafted Blade Greatsword, then challenged the might of Marika's Elden Lord himself. That battle must have been something to behold. On one side, Godfrey, the first and perhaps greatest of the Elden Lords, warrior without peer, commander of armies, the man who had tamed the wildness within himself by taking the beast Regent Sarosh upon his back. On the other, a single warrior, driven by grief and rage, wielding the collected weapons of his entire slaughtered clan, fighting not for victory, but for vengeance. The Revenger was defeated. This could hardly have been otherwise. Godfrey's strength was legendary, his skill unmatched. But the Revenger's determination, his refusal to surrender, even when his entire civilization had been erased, impressed even the Elden Lord. The sword became a treasure of Castle Morn, kept safe and honored, despite belonging to one who had opposed the Golden Order. This preservation speaks to something important about the culture of the lands between. Here was a weapon forged in opposition to Godfrey, wielded by someone who had every reason to hate everything the Golden Order represented. Yet rather than destroying it, rather than casting it into the sea or melting it down, the blade was kept as a treasure. Perhaps this was respect for a worthy opponent, recognition that the Revenger's determination deserved to be remembered, even if his cause was lost. The design of the Grafted Blade Greatsword carries symbolism beyond its immediate construction. On its guard, if you look closely, you can see the fighting lion motif associated with the golden lineage. This detail is difficult to discern in normal gameplay, but it suggests a connection between this weapon and the line of Godfrey. Perhaps the clan that was destroyed had some relation to the golden lineage, or perhaps the symbol was added after the blade became a treasure of Castle Morn as a way of acknowledging its defeat at Godfrey's hands. An interesting element emerges when examining early versions of the game's text. In the Chinese and Korean version 1 releases, the description was quite different. It spoke of a special greatsword created by joining together the swords of warriors who once served Godfrey, imbued by the power of the rune of grafting. This alternate origin story would have tied the weapon much more closely to Godric the Grafted and his connection to Godfrey's legacy. The change in the final release shifts the narrative significantly. Rather than being a tribute to Godfrey made by his own followers, the Grafted Blade Greatsword becomes something darker and more tragic. It is made by an enemy, someone fighting against everything Godfrey represented, crafted from necessity and desperation rather than loyalty and tradition. This change makes the weapon's story more compelling, transforming it from a tribute to a monument to resistance. The weapon's skill, Oath of Vengeance, perfectly encapsulates its nature and purpose. When activated, the wielder swears an oath upon the greatsword to avenge the clan, temporarily raising all attributes and also increasing poise during the moment of swearing. This buff lasts for a full minute, providing a substantial boost to every stat, making the wielder stronger, tougher, faster, and more capable in all ways. This skill represents the Revenger's original oath, the promise made by the lone survivor to continue fighting until the clan was avenged or he himself fell. By swearing this oath, the wielder takes up the same burden, shoulders that same anger and regret, becomes temporarily possessed by the determination that drove a single warrior to challenge an Elden Lord. The poise increase during the swearing itself is significant. Poise represents a character's resistance to being staggered by attacks, their ability to power through damage and continue acting. The moment of swearing the oath grants exceptional poise, suggesting that determination itself becomes a form of armor. That commitment to vengeance makes one temporarily unshakable. The Grafted Blade Greatsword requires immense strength to wield, demanding 40 points in that attribute before it can even be lifted. This makes it one of the more demanding weapons in terms of requirements, but also ensures that only those with physical might comparable to the original Revenger can properly use it. The strength requirement speaks to the weight of vengeance itself, suggesting that carrying such a burden requires exceptional power. After the shattering, Castle Morn fell under the control of Godric the Grafted, that distant scion of the Golden Lineage who ruled Limgrave from Stormvale Castle. Godric appointed Castellan Edgar to oversee Castle Morn, charging him with protecting the legendary sword housed within its walls. This placement suggests Godric saw value in the blade, perhaps recognizing a kinship with its grafted nature, its composition of many parts made into one. But by the time a Tarnished arrives at Castle Morn, the castle has been overrun by rebellious, misbegotten servants. These beastmen, long oppressed and enslaved, have risen up against their masters, slaughtering the human population and claiming the fortress for themselves. Edgar remains, trapped and desperate, unable to abandon his post while the Grafted Blade Greatsword remains in misbegotten hands. His daughter, Irina, fled the castle but was separated from her escort near the Bridge of Sacrifice. She waits there, blind and helpless, begging any passing Tarnished to deliver a letter to her father. The letter pleads with Edgar to abandon his post and flee, to save himself rather than die for a sword. But Edgar refuses. He is bound by duty to remain until the blade is reclaimed, honor demanding he fulfill his charge, even as the castle crumbles around him. The sword itself has been claimed by the Leonine Misbegotten, a powerful warrior of that beast folk who has taken the Grafted Blade Greatsword as his own. He fights with it in the ruins south of the castle, guarding his prize with feral determination. When a Tarnished defeats him and claims the blade, they complete Edgar's duty for him, allowing the Castellan to finally leave his post. But this does not lead to a happy ending. By the time Edgar reaches the bridge where Irina waited, she has been murdered, her body left broken on the road. Edgar, driven mad with grief, takes up his halberd and becomes a recusant, invading worlds to kill Tarnished in misguided revenge. The cycle of vengeance continues, fed by the blade's dark legacy. There is cruel irony in Edgar's story. He stayed to protect a weapon forged from vengeance, and in doing so, lost the daughter he should have been protecting. The Grafted Blade Greatsword, that monument to a dead clan's anger, indirectly created another tragedy, another father with reason for vengeance. The weapon's curse of anger and regret spread, touching everyone who came near it. The visual design of the Grafted Blade Greatsword has led many to see it as a tribute to the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones. Given George R.R. Martin's involvement in crafting Elden Ring's backstory and mythology, the Iron Throne was forged from the swords of defeated enemies, a symbol of conquest and dominion, uncomfortable to sit upon as a reminder that ruling requires strength and brings pain. The Grafted Blade Greatsword similarly incorporates defeated warriors' blades, though here they speak more of loss than conquest, more of grief than power. This connection to Martin's work adds another layer of meaning. In Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne represented how the pursuit of power corrupts and destroys, how the desire to rule inevitably leads to bloodshed and tragedy. The Grafted Blade Greatsword carries similar themes. It is power born from destruction, strength crafted from weakness, a weapon that embodies everything lost rather than everything gained. In practical use, the Grafted Blade Greatsword proves devastatingly effective. Its high strength scaling and base damage make it capable of staggering enemies and dealing massive damage with each swing. The Oath of Vengeance skill transforms an already powerful weapon into something overwhelming. The stat boost allowing a warrior to dominate encounters that would otherwise challenge them. The weapon is particularly effective early in a Tarnished's journey. Castle Morn can be accessed very early in the game, making the Grafted Blade Greatsword one of the first legendary armaments a player can obtain. While the strength requirement is steep, it can be met through a combination of levels, equipment that boosts stats, and two-handing the weapon to reduce the effective requirements. This accessibility means many Tarnished begin their journey to Elden Lordship wielding this Blade of Vengeance. There is something appropriate about this. The Tarnished themselves are, in a sense, revengers. They were cast out from the lands between, denied grace, and left to die in the wastelands beyond. Now they return, guided by grace restored, seeking to claim lordship in a realm that rejected them. To wield the Grafted Blade Greatsword is to acknowledge this parallel, to embrace the role of revenger, returning to settle old scores and right ancient wrongs. The blade's composition, dozens of swords fused together, might also be seen as a metaphor for the Tarnished's journey. Each sword represents a challenge overcome, an enemy defeated, a lesson learned. As the Tarnished journeys, they too collect power from those they defeat, growing stronger through conquest. The blade literalizes this process, turning collected victories into unified strength. Yet, the weapon's description never lets us forget the cost. It is burdened with oceans of anger and regret. Every swing carries the weight of those emotions, the fury of warriors who died unavenged, the sorrow of a civilization erased from existence. Using the blade means accepting that burden, understanding that power born from vengeance can never be light or joyful. The lone revenger who created the Grafted Blade Greatsword ultimately failed. He fought Godfrey and lost. His clan remained unavenged. His country stayed vanished. But his determination, his refusal to simply accept defeat and fade away, that endured. The sword became a treasure, remembered and honored, even by those who had defeated its creator. In this way, the Revenger achieved a form of immortality, not through victory, but through the sheer force of his will refusing to be forgotten. And now, that blade passes to new hands, to Tarnished who carry their own anger and regret, who fight their own battles against impossible odds. The Grafted Blade Greatsword does not promise victory. It promises only that the fight will continue, that determination can be strength unto itself, that even lone warriors can stand against Elden Lords if their cause burns bright enough. The sword endures, heavy with history. waiting for another champion, desperate enough and strong enough to lift it. And when they do, when they swear that oath of vengeance for just a moment, they become one with all those fallen warriors whose blades comprise the weapon. For 60 seconds, they carry the strength of an entire clan, the determination of a lone survivor, the fury of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. And perhaps that is vengeance enough. Rivers of Blood. In the frozen heights of the mountaintops of the giants, near the Church of Repose where the cold wind carries whispers of ancient sorrows, a tarnished will encounter one of the most feared bloody fingers in all the lands between. Okina, the aged swordsman from the land of reeds, waits there not to complete some quest or to guard a treasure, but to test his blade against any who approach. And that blade is Rivers of Blood, a cursed weapon that has felled countless men. The weapon's description tells us that Okina was a swordsman from the land of reeds, that distant country beyond the lands between, where civil war and blood-soaked madness have consumed the nation. The land of reeds is described as a place where long-term warfare has led to chaos, where the practice of the blade has been refined through endless conflict until it approached something like madness itself. Okina was a great swordsman, referred to in his mask's description as having sharpened his mind to such a degree that the absurdities of the world came into stark relief. The more he refined his technique, the more he perceived the meaninglessness underlying existence. And so, Okina renounced everything. He rose to what he considered a higher plane of being. There was only himself, his katana, and his mastery. Everything else was an illusion, a distraction, meaningless noise. Before long, Okina became a demon of a swordsman, not metaphorically, but perhaps literally. His pursuit of perfect technique stripped away everything human, leaving only the will to cut, to test his blade, to prove mastery through killing. The katana he wielded, Rivers of Blood, was already a cursed weapon before it came into his hands. How many countless men had it killed? The description does not number them, suggesting the count is beyond meaning. Rivers of Blood is a katana unlike any other in the lands between. Its blade is not traditional steel, but appears almost organic, as if forged from congealed blood given solid form. The cutting edge holds a crimson gleam, and when wielded, the weapon seems almost alive, eager to drink more blood, to add more victims to its eternal tally. The curse that permeates the blade is not some vague malevolence. It actively drives its wielder toward bloodshed, toward seeking out victims to slay. The weapon art, Corpse Piler, forms blades of cursed blood that strike repeatedly in interweaving slashes. These blood blades extend beyond physical steel, allowing the wielder to cut enemies from a distance, to pile corpses without even needing to close to melee range. Each slash of corpse piler builds up blood loss rapidly in victims. The technique is devastatingly effective, striking multiple times in rapid succession, each hit layering hemorrhage buildup until the victim's very blood turns against them, erupting in catastrophic loss of vitality. The cursed blood of the weapon mingles with the victim's own, and in that mingling, death comes swiftly. When Moog, the Lord of Blood, first encountered Okina, he felt both the sword and the madness that drove its wielder. Okina had, at some point, entered Mogwin territory, perhaps seeking worthy opponents to test his blade against, perhaps drawn by rumors of blood-soaked power that might resonate with his cursed weapon. He fought Moog himself, and the Lord of Blood felt Okina's blade cut into his flesh, felt the madness that drove each strike. Rather than destroy this powerful enemy, Moog saw opportunity. He made Okina a proposal. He offered the swordsman the life of a demon, one whose thirst would never go unsated. In Moog's vision of the Mogwin dynasty, in his blood-soaked age to come, there would always be need for warriors who could kill without hesitation, who had refined murder into art, whose technique was peerless and whose souls were already damned. Okina accepted. He became a bloody finger, an invader who hunted Tarnished on behalf of the Mogwin dynasty. But even in this service, Okina remained focused on his singular pursuit. He did not kill for Moog's dynasty. He killed to perfect his technique, to test his blade against worthy opponents, to prove that his renunciation of the world's absurdities had elevated him above normal warriors. The swordsman established himself near the Church of Repose, that desolate structure overlooking the frozen battlefield where the fire giant would make his last stand. It was a perfect location for his purposes. Any Tarnished strong enough to reach the mountaintops of giants would be worthy prey, skilled enough to provide a proper test of his abilities. And so, Okina waited, patient as the snow that never melted, ready to ambush any who approached. When a Tarnished finally arrives at the Church of Repose, Okina invades. The invasion message appears, that ominous warning that a bloody finger has entered the world, and Okina materializes nearby. He wears the white reed set, armor from his homeland, marked by its distinctive aesthetic. Upon his face, his signature mask, that cold iron visage that conceals any humanity that might remain. In his right hand, Okina wields rivers of blood. In his left, he holds a wakizashi, the shorter companion blade traditional to katana warriors. This dual-wielding style, the combination of long and short sword, speaks to sophisticated technique and adaptability. Okina can flow between stances, striking with the longer reach of the katana or the quicker strikes of the shorter blade as circumstances demand. The fight against Okina is deadly. He moves with the fluid grace of a master swordsman, his attacks flowing one into another with minimal recovery. He uses Corpse Piler without hesitation, the blood blades flashing out in rapid succession, building hemorrhage with terrifying speed. A Tarnished who is not careful, who does not respect Okina's skill, will find themselves staggered by blood loss, their vitality draining away as their own blood betrays them. Yet, Okina has a weakness. He is still human beneath the demon's mask, still vulnerable to the same techniques he uses against others. Poise can stagger him, heavy attacks can break his stance, and he does not use healing flasks during the invasion, meaning every point of damage dealt to him is permanent. The key to defeating Okina is matching his aggression, refusing to be intimidated by his legendary skill, pressing the attack until his health fails. Upon his defeat, Okina drops 2 items. The first is his mask, that iron visage that increases dexterity at the cost of focus. The second, more importantly, is Rivers of Blood itself. The cursed katana passes to the Tarnished, its hunger undiminished, its tally of victims ready to grow longer still. Rivers of Blood requires moderate strength and dexterity to wield, but more importantly, it demands investment in arcane. This unusual scaling for a katana reflects the weapon's cursed nature. It is not simply a tool of physical prowess, but an implement of darker powers, drawing on the wielder's connection to forces beyond the material. The arcane scaling also governs how quickly the weapon builds blood loss, making investment in that attribute crucial for maximizing its effectiveness. The weapon became infamous among Tarnished for its devastating power. In the hands of a skilled warrior with high arcane, Rivers of Blood could defeat even the mightiest bosses in seconds. The rapid hemorrhage buildup, ending fights before they truly began. In invasions, bloody fingers wielding Rivers of Blood became a terror. The corpse piler technique, able to shed unprepared hosts before they could mount effective defense. This reputation led to the weapon being nerfed in patches, its power reduced to bring it more in line with other armaments. Yet even diminished, Rivers of Blood remains potent. The fundamental technique of rapid blood loss buildup cannot be entirely removed without fundamentally changing the weapon's identity. It simply requires more skill to use effectively now, more careful management of positioning and timing. There is irony in how Rivers of Blood spreads through the lands between. Okina killed to perfect his technique, to prove his mastery meant something in an absurd world. Now, countless Tarnished wield copies of his blade, using it not for perfection of technique, but simply because it is effective, because it kills quickly and easily. The weapon that represented Okina's ascension to a higher plane becomes just another tool for those who care nothing for the philosophy behind it. Yet, perhaps this too fits with Okina's realization of the world's absurdity. He spent his life perfecting the art of killing, stripping away everything else to focus solely on the purity of technique. And what did it earn him? He became a bloody finger, a tool for Mohg's ambitions, killed by a passing Tarnished who claimed his blade and moved on. His technique, his demon-like skill, his renunciation of worldly absurdities. None of it ultimately mattered. The blade passed to another, who would use it for their own purposes, without understanding or caring about the philosophy behind its creation. The cursed nature of rivers of blood ensures it will continue its work, regardless of who wields it. The blade does not care about mastery or technique. It simply wants to cut, to drink blood, to add more corpses to its eternal pile. Whether swung by a demon swordsman who has transcended worldly concerns, or by a tarnished who just wants effective damage, the result is the same. Blood flows, life ends, the tally grows. Some have speculated that Rivers of Blood draws inspiration from the legendary swords of Muramasa, the famous Japanese swordsmith whose blades were said to be cursed, imbued with a bloodlust that drove their wielders to madness and violence. Like those legendary cursed blades, Rivers of Blood seems to possess a will of its own, a hunger that exceeds mere steel. To wield it is to risk becoming like Okina, to let the pursuit of killing efficiency consume everything else until nothing remains but the blade and its endless thirst. In the land of reeds, war and bloodshed have continued for so long that madness has become the norm. Warriors like Okina and Eleonora emerged from that blood-soaked madness, their skills honed to perfection through endless conflict, their humanity worn away by ceaseless violence. Rivers of Blood is a weapon born from that culture, a katana that embodies the descent into madness that comes from too much war, too much killing, too much blood. When the Tarnished picks up Rivers of Blood from Okina's corpse, they inherit more than just a powerful weapon. They take up a piece of the Land of Reed's cursed legacy, a fragment of that blood-soaked madness. Every time they activate Corpse Piler, every time the cursed blood blades flash out to build hemorrhage in their victims, they participate in that legacy, adding their own chapter to the weapon's dark history. And the blade is satisfied. It does not mourn Okina or remember his skill. It simply continues its work, drinking blood, piling corpses, fulfilling its curse through new hands. The rivers of blood flow on, fed by the lives of all who fall before its edge, running red and endless through the lands between, a testament to how easily skill and technique can become tools of mere slaughter, how quickly the pursuit of perfection can transform into simple bloodlust. Okina sought a higher plane, wanted to transcend the world's absurdities through perfect mastery of the blade. But in the end, he became just another corpse beside a frozen church, his technique ending with him, his blade continuing without him. The absurdity he tried to escape claimed him anyway, proving that no amount of skill or renunciation can lift someone above the basic truth that all things end, even demon swordsmen, even cursed blades passed from hand to hand until the names of their original wielders are forgotten. But the blood remembers. Rivers of Blood remembers every victim, carries them all within its cursed steel, and adds more with each new wielder, each new age, each new war. The rivers never run dry. Hand of Malenia. At the very bottom of the Halig tree, in a chamber accessed through Elfale's winding roots, awaits one of the most challenging encounters in all the lands between. Malenia, Blade of Makella, stands in patient vigilance, her prosthetic arm gleaming in the dim light. And when she raises that arm, when she levels the blade built into its structure, those who witness it claim to see wings, wings of fierce determination that have never known defeat. The Hand of Malenia is not simply a weapon. It is a prosthetic war limb, a replacement for the arm that Malenia lost to the scarlet rot that has plagued her since birth. But through consecration, the blade has been made resistant to rot, transformed from vulnerability into strength, from loss into symbol of victory. The war prosthesis became synonymous with Malenia's undefeated record, a testament to how she turned affliction into advantage, transformed disability into devastating power. The blade's description tells us that some claim to have seen wings when the weapon was raised aloft. These are not literal, physical wings, but rather the manifestation of Malenia's indomitable will, made visible through her movements. When she sweeps the blade through the air in the patterns of waterfowl dance, the motion creates the illusion of wings, as if determination itself has taken flight, as if the refusal to accept defeat can carry someone beyond the limitations of flesh. To understand the Hand of Malenia, we must understand Malenia herself. Born as an Empyrean, daughter of Radagon and Marika, twin to Makella, she was cursed from the moment of birth with scarlet rot. This ancient blight ate away at her body, causing her flesh to decay even as she lived. Most would have succumbed, would have let the rot consume them and accepted death as merciful release from agony. Malenia refused. She found a mentor, the blind swordsman from a distant land, who had once sealed away an outer god of rot itself. This master, garbed in flowing blue and wielding a curved blade patterned after water, taught Malenia techniques that would allow her to fight despite her condition, to transform the rot from weakness into weapon. Through his tutelage, she gained wings of unparalleled strength, becoming one of the most feared warriors in all the lands between. But the rot continued its work. It claimed her limbs gradually, forcing amputations to prevent the corruption from spreading to vital organs. Her legs, her eyes, her arm, all fell to the disease she carried within. Yet each loss only seemed to strengthen her resolve. Where others saw disability, Malenia saw opportunity. Where others would have withdrawn from combat, she pushed herself to even greater mastery. The prosthetic arm that held the Hand of Malenia was crafted with such skill that it became extension of her will, moving as naturally as her original limb once had. The blade built into its structure, was long and elegant, a katana of exceptional craftsmanship. Through consecration, through ritual and prayer, and perhaps through sheer force of Malenia's determination, the blade became proof against rot. It would not decay. It would not fail. It was a statement that even the scarlet rot could be overcome through sufficient will. Malenia's victories are countless. From her youth to the shattering, she fought battle after battle, duel after duel, war after war, and she never lost, not once. Even against Radon, her half-brother, and perhaps the only warrior in the lands between who could match her skill, the battle ended in stalemate rather than defeat. She was forced to unleash the scarlet rot within herself, blooming the scarlet flower a second time. But she did not fall. She did not yield. The undefeated record held. The weapon skill of the Hand of Malenia is Waterfowl Dance, that most feared technique in Malenia's arsenal. The wielder performs a series of one-footed leaps in the manner of a waterfowl, unleashing swift yet graceful slashing combos. Up to 3 successive flurries can be performed with proper input timing, each one carrying the warrior forward through the air, covering ground that should not be possible to cross, striking with precision that seems almost supernatural. Waterfowl dance is a technique of pure dexterity and technique. It requires no magical power, no special blood, no divine blessing. It is skill refined to its absolute peak, movement perfected through endless practice and adaptation to a body constantly betraying itself through rot. When Malenia performs this dance, she defies gravity, defies the limitations of her prosthetics, defies every physical law that should prevent someone in her condition from moving with such fluid grace. The technique draws comparisons to the flowing water style of her mentor. Each slash flows into the next with minimal wasted motion, creating an unbroken stream of cuts that overwhelm defenses through sheer speed and precision. The forward momentum allows the warrior to close distance rapidly, to engage and disengage at will, to control the spacing of combat completely. Against multiple enemies, Waterfowl Dance becomes even more devastating, the circular sweeps of each flurry striking everything within range simultaneously. When a Tarnished defeats Malenia and claims her remembrance, they can exchange it with Finger Reader Enia at the Round Table Hold for the Hand of Malenia. Holding this weapon is to hold a fragment of the blade of Miquella herself, to inherit a piece of that undefeated legacy, to carry the symbol of resistance against the scarlet rot. The weapon requires 16 strength and 48 dexterity to wield, demanding significant investment in the swiftness and precision attribute. This makes sense for a weapon that is all about technique over raw power, about flowing movement and perfect timing, rather than overwhelming force. The Hand of Malenia rewards those who have trained their reactions and honed their skills to match its demanding nature. The blade scales primarily with strength and dexterity, but the dexterity scaling far outpaces the strength component at higher levels. This pure physical scaling means the weapon does not benefit from arcane or intelligence, or faith, making it a purist's weapon for dexterity builds. It is for warriors who trust in their blade arm and their technique rather than magic or special powers. One notable limitation is that the Hand of Malenia builds blood loss at a moderate rate. Unlike Rivers of Blood, with its rapid hemorrhage buildup, the Uchigatana, which can be infused with blood affinity. Malenia's blade relies more on direct cutting power than status effects. This is thematically appropriate. Malenia's strength was never in tricks or gimmicks. She won through superior skill, through relentless pressure, through the refusal to yield even when she should have fallen. The weapon cannot be buffed by consumables or magic, cannot have its affinity changed, cannot accept different ashes of war. What you see is what you get. This is Hand of Malenia as it was, as it is, as it always will be. There is purity in this inflexibility, a statement that the weapon needs no enhancement, that its natural state is sufficient for victory. Using Waterfowl Dance effectively requires practice and understanding. The skill leaves the wielder vulnerable during its startup, that brief moment before launching into the first flurry. Enemies can interrupt the technique if they strike during this window, staggering the user and wasting the substantial focus point cost. Proper use demands reading the enemy's patterns, finding the openings where the dance can be initiated safely. Once started, however, Waterfowl Dance carries the warrior through 3 successive flurries if fully input. Each flurry propels forward, allowing the technique to chase fleeing enemies or cross gaps that normal movement cannot span. The strikes come rapidly, building damage through accumulated cuts rather than single powerful blows. Against enemies with low poise, the technique can stun lock them, preventing recovery between flurries. Against higher poise enemies, it chips away at their stance rapidly, setting up critical hits. The skill synergizes exceptionally well with certain talismans and effects. The Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and Millicent's Prosthesis all trigger from the repeated attacks, stacking attack power with each successive hit. The Godskin Swaddling Cloth heals health based on consecutive attacks, allowing the wielder to sustain themselves through extended combat. Proper build optimization can transform Waterfowl Dance from merely powerful into absolutely devastating. There is something deeply moving about wielding the Hand of Malenia. This weapon represents triumph over adversity in its most extreme form. Malenia could have surrendered to the rot at any point. She could have accepted her condition as curse and withdrawn from the world, seeking comfort in her brother's Haligtree and nothing more. Instead, she became perhaps the greatest warrior of her age, undefeated in battle despite afflictions that would have destroyed lesser beings. The prosthetic nature of the weapon adds to this significance. This is literally the replacement for what was lost, the compensation for what the rot took away. Yet, it is not inferior to what came before. If anything, the Hand of Malenia is superior, refined through necessity into something that exceeds natural limits. The blade that should not exist, attached to the arm that was not born, wielded by the warrior who should not have survived, becomes symbol of impossible victory. Those wings that people claim to have seen when the weapon is raised are not hallucination or poetic exaggeration. They are the visible manifestation of will, so fierce that it reshapes perception, makes the impossible seem momentarily real. When Malenia fought, when she raised that blade and prepared to dance, those watching saw something beyond mere combat technique. They saw determination given form, saw the human spirit refusing to accept limitations. They saw what can be achieved when surrender is simply not an option. The fact that Malenia waits at the bottom of the halig tree, guarding the approach to Miquella's cocoon, tells us everything about her priorities. She could have sought the Elden throne for herself. As an Empyrean, she had the right. As an undefeated warrior, she had the strength. But she chose instead to stand vigil over her brother, to protect him in his vulnerable state, to ensure that no one disturbed his ascension. Even at the end, even rotted and partially consumed by the disease she carried, even after blooming twice and teetering on the edge of becoming a goddess of rot herself, Malenia's loyalty never waned. Using the hand of Malenia after defeating her adds weight to every encounter. Each sweep of the blade, each execution of waterfowl dance, carries memory of the warrior who originally wielded it. The weapon does not forget its master. It moves as she moved, strikes as she struck, dances as she danced. In wielding it, a tarnished becomes for brief moments an echo of Malenia herself, channeling that same determination, that same refusal to yield. The weapon is partially effective against enemies that Malenia herself would have faced. Clean-wrought knights who served her directly fall rapidly to the blade of their former commander. Rot-infected enemies discover that consecration protects the weapon, even as it cuts through their corrupted flesh. And other katana wielders, those who might think themselves skilled, quickly learn that technique refined through adversity beats technique learned in comfort every time. Some tarnished criticize the hand of Malenia for being difficult to use effectively, for requiring more skill than other powerful weapons. They prefer Rivers of Blood for its easier blood loss buildup, or Moonveil for its ranged magic slashes, or simply the reliable Uchigatana with whatever Ash of War suits their playstyle. These criticisms miss the point entirely. The hand of Malenia is not meant to be easy. It is meant to be earned, both in the fight to claim it and in the practice required to master its use. Malenia herself was not easy. She did not take the path of least resistance. She faced challenges that should have destroyed her and emerged stronger for the struggle. Her weapon reflects this philosophy. It rewards dedication, punishes carelessness, demands that its wielder rise to its level, rather than allowing them to remain comfortable in mediocrity. This is not a weapon for those seeking effortless victory. It is a weapon for those willing to push themselves, to train until waterfowl dance becomes instinct, to earn their wins through skill rather than exploiting optimal strategies. And when mastery is achieved, when a tarnished can execute the dance flawlessly, reading enemies and timing flurries with precision, the hand of Malenia becomes something transcendent. It stops being just a weapon and becomes expression of the warrior's will, proof that they too possess that fierce determination that knows no defeat, evidence that they have taken Malenia's lesson to heart and made it their own. The blade waits in the round table hold, exchanged for the remembrance of the wrought goddess, ready to pass from Malenia's hand to another's. It carries with it all the weight of her story, all the pain of her affliction, all the glory of her undefeated record. To wield it is to accept that legacy, to take up not just a weapon, but a philosophy, a way of approaching combat and life itself with absolute refusal to surrender. And perhaps when the wielder raises the hand of Malenia aloft and prepares to dance, others too will see wings, wings of determination, of will unbroken by any challenge, of the eternal truth that defeat is only real when we accept it. Until then, the fight continues, the blade cuts, and the waterfowl dances on, graceful and deadly, and absolutely undefeated. The Starscourge Greatsword. In the vast expanse of the Caelid Wilds, where scarlet rot has transformed once green lands into a hellscape of decay, there was fought one of the most legendary battles in the history of the lands between. But before the rot came, before Malenia bloomed her flower of devastation, this was the domain of General Radahn, the mightiest warrior the demigods produced, a giant among giants who had conquered the very stars themselves, and the weapons he wielded to achieve such impossible feats were twin colossal blades known together as the Starscourge Greatsword. These paired greatswords are immediately recognizable by their distinctive design. Each blade is enormous, befitting Radahn's massive size, and constructed from black steel that drinks in light rather than reflecting it. The weapons are curved, giving them a scimitar-like appearance despite their tremendous weight and bulk. Most remarkably, they are designed to be wielded together, one in each hand, creating a fighting style that combined overwhelming power with surprising speed and versatility. The description of these weapons tells us they are mementos of General Radahn's war against the stars. One blade is imbued with gravitational power, while the other bears the mark of the red lion. This pairing represents two fundamental aspects of Radahn's identity: his conquest of cosmic forces and his connection to Leonard, his beloved horse. The gravitational powers that Radahn studied and mastered in his youth were initially learned so that he would never have to abandon his scrawny steed. Leonard was not a war horse, not a mighty destrier bred for battle. He was small, thin, likely intended for light riding or as a companion animal. But Radahn loved this horse, and when he grew to enormous size through his demigod nature, the question arose of how he could continue to ride his cherished companion. The answer came through the study of gravity magic. In the town of Celia, known for its sorcery, Radon learned to manipulate gravitational forces. He could make himself lighter, redistributing his tremendous weight so that Leonard could carry him without strain. This same magic, initially learned for a purpose as tender as preserving a friendship with a horse, would eventually allow Radon to achieve his most legendary feat. An alabaster lord, one of those ancient beings with skin of stone, taught Radon deeper secrets of gravity manipulation. Under this tutelage, Radon's power grew from the practical to the cosmic. He learned not just to affect his own weight, but to command gravitational forces on a massive scale. He could pull, push, crush, and lift through sheer manipulation of fundamental physical forces. His power grew to such extent that he could challenge the very stars themselves. And challenge them he did. When the stars began to fall toward the lands between, Radon went to meet them, alone, with his twin greatswords and his command of gravity. He contested the falling stars, arresting them in their descent. This was not a momentary feat, but a sustained effort. Radon has held the stars at bay for years, continuously exerting his will to keep them frozen in place. This cosmic victory earned him his title, Starscourge, the one who conquered the stars. The Starscourge Greatsword pair embodies this achievement. The gravitational power imbued in one blade allows the wielder to channel similar forces, manipulating gravity to enhance attacks or create devastating special techniques. This blade glows with purple energy when its power is activated, the same color that marks gravitational sorceries throughout the lands between. Each swing can pull enemies closer or crush them under increased gravitational force. The second blade, marked with the red lion, represents Radon's companion, Leonard. This is not merely decorative, but symbolic of the bond between warrior and horse. The red lion imagery speaks to leonine courage and loyalty, qualities that Leonard demonstrated by remaining with Radon even after Scarlet Rot reduced the great general to a mindless shell of his former self. The horse stayed with his master, enduring the horrors of the rot-infected Khalid alongside him. When wielded together through power stance, the Starscourge Greatsword pair creates unique attacks unavailable to either blade alone. The jumping attack with both swords involves a high leap followed by a devastating crash that sends shockwaves through the ground. The running attack sees the wielder spin like a cyclone, both blades extended, creating a deadly whirlwind. These techniques require immense strength to execute, but deliver proportionally devastating results. The unique weapon skill associated with the Starscourge Greatsword is Starcaller Cry, a technique that perfectly encapsulates Radon's mastery of gravitational forces. When activated, the wielder thrusts both swords into the ground and releases a powerful roar that generates gravitational waves. These waves pull enemies toward the wielder from considerable distances, gathering foes into a cluster. Following this pull, a secondary input triggers a devastating explosion of gravitational force that damages and launches everything caught in the effect. This skill recreates one of Radahn's most iconic moves from his boss fight, when he thrusts his blades down and roars, creating those gravitational waves. Players must either get far enough away to avoid the pull or prepare to dodge the explosion. The fact that a Tarnished can replicate this technique with the Remembrance weapon speaks to the power contained within these blades. The black steel construction of the swords is itself significant. Black steel appears in various weapons throughout the Lands Between, often associated with warriors who have achieved legendary status. It is harder than standard steel, capable of holding an edge longer and resisting damage better. For weapons that must withstand the stress of gravitational manipulation and combat against cosmic forces, such durability is essential. The curved design of the blades might seem unusual for weapons of such size, but it serves specific purposes. The curve allows for more effective slashing attacks, concentrating force along the edge rather than distributing it across a flat blade. When wielding weapons this massive, every aspect of design that increases cutting power is valuable. Additionally, the curve creates a more menacing appearance, contributing to Radahn's intimidating presence on the battlefield. To obtain the Starscourge Greatsword, a Tarnished must first defeat General Radahn at the Radahn Festival in Redmane Castle. This is no small feat. Radahn, even afflicted with scarlet rot and reduced to madness, remains one of the most challenging bosses in the base game. He combines devastating physical attacks with powerful gravitational sorceries, can rain meteors from the sky, and fights with relentless aggression across a vast arena. The festival itself is a significant event in the game's narrative. Warriors from across the Lands Between gather at Redmane Castle for the specific purpose of giving Radahn an honorable death in combat. The gathering includes Tarnished, warriors, and even some of Radahn's own soldiers who wish to see their general freed from his rot-mad existence. When the festival begins, all these champions charge across the battlefield together toward where Radahn waits. Defeating Radahn requires understanding of his attack patterns, managing stamina carefully, and knowing when to attack versus when to dodge. His gravitational pull attacks, his charging assaults, his aerial slam after disappearing into the sky as a meteor himself, all must be survived and countered. When he finally falls, his remembrance can be claimed and exchanged for either Starscourge Greatsword or Radahn's unique bow and its special arrows. For those who choose the swords, they receive not one weapon, but two, wielded together to recreate Radahn's paired fighting style. This requires significant strength investment. These are colossal weapons that demand high physical stats to use effectively, but the payoff is substantial. Few weapons in the game deliver such raw physical damage per hit, and even fewer offer the crowd control utility of Starcaller Cry. The requirements to wield Starscourge Greatsword effectively mean that this weapon is primarily the domain of strength builds. While it has some intelligence scaling due to the gravitational magic infused in the blades, the primary stat requirement is pure physical might. This makes sense thematically. Radahn was not primarily a sorcerer or scholar, but a warrior who learned magic to enhance his martial capabilities. The swords reflect this philosophy, being fundamentally weapons of direct physical force, enhanced by cosmic power. When considering Radahn's full story, the tragedy of these swords becomes apparent. They were forged to commemorate his greatest achievement, his conquest of the stars. They represent the peak of his power, the moment when he stood alone against cosmic forces and won. But they also witnessed his fall, when Malenia faced him in Caelid and bloomed her scarlet rot. The blades could not prevent his infection, could not save him from the madness that followed. Yet, even in his diminished state, even when his mind was gone and he was reduced to wandering the deserts of Caelid mindlessly, consuming corpses, Radahn never let go of these swords. He continued wielding them, continued using them in combat, his muscle memory and warrior instincts persisting even after higher cognition fled. When Tarnished and champions finally came to fight him, he met them with the same weapons he had used to challenge the stars. This persistence speaks to the deep connection between warrior and weapon. The Starscourge Greatsword was not just a tool to Radahn, but an extension of himself, so fundamental to his identity that even total cognitive collapse could not separate him from them. The swords had witnessed his rise, his triumph, his love for Leonard, his battle against Malenia, and his descent into wrought madness. They remained constant through all of it. The gravitational power stored in the blades also has broader implications for the world. By wielding weapons imbued with the same forces Radahn used to arrest the stars, a Tarnished becomes wielder of cosmic power. They can manipulate gravity on a smaller scale, pulling enemies, creating zones of crushing force, generating explosions of gravitational energy. While this is nothing compared to actually holding the stars in place, it demonstrates that such power can be channeled through properly crafted weapons. The red lion mark on the second sword serves as a constant reminder of Leonard. Every time the weapons are drawn, every time they are used in combat, the memory of Radahn's beloved horse is present. This small detail humanizes the Starscourge, reminding us that this legendary warrior who conquered the stars did so partly because he wanted to continue riding a scrawny horse he loved. The greatest displays of cosmic power in the lands between began with an act of tenderness and friendship. In practical combat, the Starscourge Greatsword excels at dealing with groups of enemies and large single targets. The Starcaller Cry skill can gather scattered foes into a convenient cluster, making area of effect follow-up attacks much more effective. The raw damage of each swing means even heavily armored enemies and bosses take significant punishment. The reach of colossal weapons allows maintaining safe distance while still threatening opponents. The main drawback of the Starscourge Greatsword is the slow attack speed inherent to weapons of this size. Each swing takes time to wind up and recover from, creating windows of vulnerability. against fast enemies, or in situations with many attackers coming from different directions, the sluggishness can prove fatal. This makes the weapon better suited for patient, methodical fighting rather than aggressive rush-down tactics. Yet, for those who master the timing and positioning required, the Starscourge Greatsword becomes one of the most satisfying weapons in the game. There is something visceral about wielding the same bared blades that Radon used to challenge the stars, about performing Starcaller Cry, and watching enemies helplessly dragged toward their doom, about delivering crushing overhead slams that echo the general's own devastating attacks. The black steel gleams darkly as the blades swing, purple gravitational energy crackling along their length. The red lion mark stands bold against the dark metal, a splash of color that draws the eye and reminds observers that these are not ordinary swords, but legendary weapons wielded by a legendary warrior. When power stands and used by someone with sufficient strength, they transform the wielder into a force of nature, a human typhoon of steel and cosmic power. The Starscourge Greatsword pair stands as a monument to Radon's achievements and his tragedy. They commemorate his conquest of the stars while serving as a reminder of his fall. They represent the love of a warrior for his horse while channeling forces that bend reality itself. They are weapons of brutal physical violence, enhanced by the esoteric cosmic power of gravity. And they endure, waiting in remembrance form for a tarnished who proved strong enough to claim and wield them, continuing the legend of the Starscourge long after the general himself has fallen. Maliketh's Black Blade. In the crumbling ruins of Farum Azula, that ancient city suspended impossibly in the sky, where time itself seems to flow strangely, there waits a guardian of terrible purpose. He appears first as Garank, the beast clergyman, a hunched creature consumed by insatiable hunger for deathroot. But this is merely a disguise, a role adopted to serve a greater goal. His true identity is Maliketh, the Black Blade, Queen Marika's shadow-bound beast, and the keeper of destined death itself. And the weapon he wields, the blade bound within his own flesh, is one of the most significant armaments ever to exist in the lands between. The description of Maliketh's Black Blade tells us it once harbored the power of the Rune of Death, but now exists as a sad shadow of its former glory. This diminishment occurred after a fragment of death was stolen on that fateful night, the night of the Black Knives, when Godwyn the Golden was murdered and the curse of those who live in death was unleashed upon the world. In response to this theft, to this betrayal of his trust and failure of his sacred duty, Maliketh bound the blade within his own flesh, sealing it inside his body so that none might ever rob death again. To understand the true significance of this weapon, we must understand Maliketh himself and the role that he has played in shaping the very fabric of reality in the lands between. He is a shadow-bound beast, given to Queen Marika the Eternal when she was chosen as an Empyrean by the Two Fingers. This is the nature of shadows in this world. Every Empyrean receives a beast warrior as guardian and companion, bound to them by cosmic decree. We see this pattern repeated with Ranni and Blade. But Maliketh was not simply a guardian in the conventional sense. He was given a specific task of cosmic importance. When the Greater Will sought to establish the Golden Order and create an age of eternal rule, death itself had to be removed from the natural cycle. The rune of death was plucked from the Elden Ring and given to Maliketh to guard. His blade became the vessel for this rune, making him the only being in the lands between capable of inflicting true, permanent death. This responsibility made Maliketh perhaps the most feared entity in the entire realm. The descriptions tell us that there was not one demigod who did not fear him. His very name came to mean death of the demigods. These supposedly immortal beings, children of gods who had been granted eternal life through the removal of death from the Elden Ring, still feared Maliketh because his blade could end them permanently. He was the exception to their immortality, the single point of vulnerability in an otherwise invulnerable existence. Before Maliketh received the rune of death to guard, he first had to claim it. This required defeating the previous holder, the gloam-eyed queen, who led the Godskin Apostles in their god hunt. The battle between Maliketh and the queen must have been apocalyptic, pitting Queen Marika's champion against an Empyrean who wielded the god-slaying black flames. But Maliketh prevailed, defeating the queen and seizing the rune of death, binding it into his blade, where it would remain sealed for an age. With death removed from the Elden Ring and secured in Maliketh's keeping, the Golden Order could be fully established. Queen Marika became its one true god, and her offspring were granted a form of immortality. The demigods could war among themselves, could suffer wounds and setbacks, but they could not truly die unless Maliketh and his blade came for them. This created a strange stasis where conflict could occur, but nothing fundamental could change, where power struggles could rage, but the players remained constant. Maliketh also commanded the Black Blade Kindred, those living gargoyle warriors who wielded weapons held together by blackened corpse wax. These creatures served as extensions of his will, guardians and warriors who carried out his purposes through the lands between. They represented another layer of his power, proof that he was not merely an individual guardian, but the master of forces aligned with death itself. For an age, this arrangement held. Maliketh guarded death faithfully, and the Golden Order flourished under Marika's rule. But then came the Night of the Black Knives, and everything changed. Ranni the Witch, another Empyrean who chafed under the destiny the Greater Will had planned for her, orchestrated a conspiracy of cosmic significance. She needed a fragment of the Rune of Death to accomplish her goals, to create weapons capable of killing in both body and soul. Through means that remain somewhat mysterious, Ronnie succeeded in stealing a fragment of death from Maliketh's blade. The theft was not complete. She did not claim the entire rune of death, but what she took was enough. With this fragment, she forged the god-slaying black knives, weapons that were then given to the Black Knife assassins who carried out the murder of Godwyn the Golden. This theft and the subsequent assassination represented Maliketh's greatest failure. He had been given one sacred duty above all others, to guard death and ensure it could not be stolen or misused. And he had failed. A fragment had been taken from him, used to commit deicide, unleashing consequences that would ultimately lead to the shattering and the collapse of the Golden Order he had helped establish. The guilt and shame of this failure consumed Maliketh. He responded by taking the most drastic measure he could conceive. He bound his blade and the rune of death sealed within it into his own flesh, literally incorporating the weapon into his body. Now, to steal death, one would have to tear it from his living essence. No mere theft could succeed. Death had become part of him, and he would die before allowing it to be taken again. But binding death within himself had other consequences. The rune of death began to hunger, and that hunger became Maliketh's hunger. Death itself, sealed away and incomplete after the theft of its fragment, developed a terrible appetite that could never be satisfied. This hunger drove Maliketh to adopt the persona of Geraint, beast clergyman, and to offer warriors weapons and incantations in exchange for Deathroot. Deathroot is what grew from the spreading corruption of Godwyn's soulless corpse. After his death in soul only, with his body remaining alive, Godwyn became the Prince of Death, and his corpse began spreading through the roots of the great tree beneath the Erdtree. Where his death-corrupted body touched the roots, Deathroot sprouted, and from this Deathroot came those who live in death, undead beings trapped in a state that should have never existed. As Geraint, Maliketh devoured every piece of Deathroot brought to him, hoping to consume the spread of this corruption, to somehow reclaim the fragment of death that had been stolen, and restore completeness to the rune he guarded. But Godwyn's Deathroot replicated faster than it could be consumed. The hunger could never be satisfied. The mission was ultimately pointless, yet Geraint continued, driven by guilt and duty in equal measure. The weapon itself, Maliketh's Black Blade, is a colossal sword of distinctive design. The blade appears to be crafted from dark metal that seems to drink in light rather than reflect it. Along its length run patterns that suggest both beast claws and the natural branching of death itself, organic and terrible. The weapon is massive, befitting a beast warrior of Maliketh's size and strength, yet it can be wielded by a tarnished who claims his remembrance after defeating him in combat. The blade scales primarily with strength, dexterity, and faith, requiring balanced investment across multiple attributes to wield effectively. The faith requirement is particularly significant, representing the theological weight of wielding a weapon that contains the power of death itself. This is not merely a physical implement, but a metaphysical tool, something that operates on the boundary between the material and the divine. The weapon deals both physical and holy damage, an interesting combination that speaks to its nature. The holy damage represents its connection to the Golden Order and Queen Marika, the divine authority under which Maliketh served. The physical damage represents the more straightforward aspect of its function as a weapon of war. Together, they create a blade that can harm both flesh and spirit, both mortal and divine. The unique weapon skill of Maliketh's Black Blade is Destined Death. When activated, the wielder sets free the remnants of Destined Death, plunging the greatsword into the ground to summon a myriad of black blades that erupt from the earth in a spreading wave. This attack deals immediate damage to everything it touches, but more significantly, it reduces the maximum health of affected enemies and continues to wear down their health for a short time afterward. This health reduction effect is what makes Destined Death so devastating and so true to its lore. The attack does not simply damage enemies in the moment, but diminishes them, reduces their very vitality, makes them less than they were. This is the power of death itself, the ability to impose endings, to make things finite, to ensure that even the immortal can be brought low. Against bosses with massive health pools, this reduction can be the difference between a fight that seems impossible and one that becomes manageable. The visual effect of Destined Death is spectacular and thematically appropriate. When the blade is plunged into the ground, black and red energy erupts outward, creating the appearance of countless ghostly blades sprouting from the earth. These phantom weapons carry the essence of death itself, each one a fragment of power that Maliketh has guarded for so long. The attack covers a wide area, making it effective against both single targets and groups of enemies. To obtain Maliketh's Black Blade, a Tarnished must first journey to crumbling Farum Azula, that impossible city in the sky, reached only after burning the Erdtree at the Forge of the Giants. There, they must navigate through the ruins, past ancient dragons and beastmen, until they reach the arena where Gurranq awaits. The fight itself is a two-phase encounter, beginning with Gurranq in his beast clergyman form, and transitioning into Maliketh, wielding his unbound blade. The first phase against Gurranq is challenging enough, with the beast clergyman hurling stone fragments and rocks, leaping across the arena with bestial agility, and executing devastating claw strikes. But when his health is reduced to half, a cutscene triggers. Gurranq cries out, speaking to the Tarnished about their determination to steal death from him once more. And then he unbinds his blade from his flesh, revealing his true identity and entering his second phase as Maliketh, the Black Blade. This second phase is where the fight becomes truly difficult. Maliketh moves with incredible speed and acrobatic grace, flipping through the air, clinging to pillars around the arena, and executing strikes that seem to come from impossible angles. Every one of his attacks inflicts not just immediate damage, but also rapid health loss over time and temporary reduction of maximum health. Fighting Maliketh means fighting death itself, and every hit reminds the player of mortality in ways that other bosses do not. The Blasphemous Claw, a special item obtained from Rykard's questline, can be used to parry certain attacks from Maliketh, creating openings for counterattacks. This creates an interesting connection between weapons and characters, linking Rykard's rebellion against the Golden Order to the fight against its greatest guardian. The claw allows for a more aggressive approach in the fight, turning Maliketh's own devastating strikes into opportunities rather than threats. When Maliketh finally falls, his dying words are a cry to Marika for forgiveness. This moment is heartbreaking in its implications. Here is a being who has served faithfully for an age, who was given an impossible task and succeeded at it for countless years, who failed once and punished himself more severely than any external judgment could have done. And in his final moment, what he seeks is not victory or vindication, but simply forgiveness from the queen he served. After defeating Maliketh, the Tarnished can claim his remembrance and exchange it with Enya at the Round Table Hold for either Maliketh's Black Blade or the Black Blade incantation. For those who choose the weapon, they inherit not just an armament, but a fragment of cosmic responsibility. This blade once guarded death itself. It failed in that duty, was bound into flesh to prevent further failure, and now passes to a new wielder who will use it for purposes Maliketh could never have imagined. The weapon's description, calling it a sad shadow of its former glory, is poignant and accurate. Before the theft, when the rune of death was complete and fully bound within the blade, it must have been incomparably more powerful. The black flames of the Godskin Apostles are described as having lost their true power after Maliketh sealed destined death. If the god-slaying flames were diminished by death's sealing, imagine how much more powerful death itself must have been before a fragment was stolen from it. Yet even diminished, even as a sad shadow, Maliketh's Black Blade remains one of the most powerful weapons available to a Tarnished. The destined death skill can devastate bosses and tough enemies. The combination of physical and holy damage makes it effective against a wide variety of foes. The reduction of maximum health creates advantages that pure damage output cannot match. Shadow or not, the blade retains enough of its former glory to be truly formidable. In practical combat application, Maliketh's Black Blade excels in situations where sustained damage and health reduction matter more than burst damage. Against bosses with massive health pools who can heal or regenerate, the maximum health reduction from destined death creates permanent disadvantages that cannot be undone. Against enemies that rely on high health totals to survive, diminishing that pool makes follow-up attacks proportionally more effective. The weapon is particularly effective in the DLC areas, where bosses have significantly inflated health pools. The percentage-based health reduction and damage over time effects of destined death become even more valuable when enemies have tens of thousands of hit points. What might have been a 15-minute endurance test becomes a more manageable encounter when the boss's maximum health is consistently being reduced throughout the fight. Thematically, wielding Maliketh's Black Blade creates interesting tensions for a Tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord. This is the weapon that enforced the Golden Order's vision of immortality for the chosen few. It was the instrument by which death was kept sealed away, preventing natural cycles from operating. Yet now, it serves whoever claims it, potentially being used to tear down the very order it once protected. The weapon also connects to multiple quest lines and characters throughout the game. Gerank's quest for Deathroot creates one of the longest and most involved NPC interactions available. Ronnie's theft of Death Fragment links directly to Maliketh's failure and subsequent binding of the blade. Fia's quest to restore death to the Elden Ring stands in opposition to everything Maliketh worked to achieve. The Black Blade sits at the center of multiple narrative threads, connecting disparate characters and quest lines into a cohesive whole. For players interested in the lore and philosophy of Elden Ring, Maliketh's Black Blade represents a physical anchor point for exploring questions about death, immortality, order, and the cost of eternal rule. The weapon embodies the Golden Order's fundamental choice to remove death from natural cycles, and it carries the consequence of that choice etched into its very metal. Every use of destined death is a reminder that death cannot be truly sealed away, that it will always find ways to manifest, that attempts to eliminate mortality ultimately fail. The relationship between Maliketh and Marika deserves deeper examination in the context of this weapon. He is described as her shadow-bound beast, her loyal guardian, her half-brother in some interpretations of the text. The blade he wields was made powerful by her command, served her purposes, enforced her vision of order. Yet, when that order began to crumble, when the shattering came and everything fell apart, where was Maliketh? He was hidden away as Gerankh, consuming Deathroot in a futile attempt to undo the consequences of his failure. He was not fighting in the shattering, not claiming territory or power for himself, not acting as Marika's champion in the wars that tore the lands between apart. He had removed himself from the conflict entirely, consumed by shame and hunger, driven by guilt to pursue a pointless task rather than engage with the reality of what the world had become. This absence speaks to the profound impact the theft had on him. A being defined entirely by his duty and his loyalty, confronted with failure in that duty, could not simply move forward. He could not accept that he had failed and continue serving in other ways. The failure became his entire existence, consuming him as thoroughly as he consumed Deathroot, leaving no room for anything else until a Tarnished finally came to claim the rune of death he still guarded. When a player character wields Maliketh's Black Blade, they carry this entire history. They bear the weight of cosmic duty betrayed, of guardian become exile, of weapon bound in flesh and then freed again. The blade remembers every demigod who feared it, every judgment it passed, every soul it sent to true death in an age before death was possible for most. And it remembers its failure, the theft that should never have occurred, the fragment that was taken and used to commit the first true death of a demigod in the New Age. The colossal sword classification is appropriate for more than just its size. This is a weapon of cosmic significance, heavy not just in weight, but in meaning. Every swing carries the authority of death itself. Every activation of destined death releases power that once was locked away to create the Golden Order. The blade is colossal in its implications, in its history, in the responsibilities and consequences it embodies. In the end, Maliketh's Black Blade is both monument and warning, both tool and symbol, both weapon and philosophy. It speaks to the cost of immortality, the burden of duty, the impossibility of perfectly sealing away fundamental forces, and the inevitability that death, no matter how long suppressed, will always return. And now it rests in the hands of those who would challenge the very order it once protected, turned from guardian's tool to revolutionary's weapon, from keeper of stasis to instrument of change. The black metal gleams darkly, patterns of death and claw etched along its length, waiting to be plunged into the ground once more, waiting to release destined death upon enemies that thought themselves beyond its reach, waiting to fulfill purposes that Queen Marika never intended and Maliketh could never have imagined when he first bound the rune of death within his blade so long ago. If you enjoyed this first dive into the legendary weapons of Elden Ring, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing. There are more weapons to examine and more relics to explore. Thank you for listening.